Well, I can tell you, first of all, the defending men's champion of the Australian Open here on the very first day is not here to defend his title, as you mentioned. Novak Djokovic was escorted by authorities to the airport here in Melbourne, put on a plane to Dubai last night, just hours after his attorneys were unsuccessful in their bid to lift that cancellation of his visa for a second time by the Australian government. The immigration minister arguing that the unvaccinated Serbian tennis star being allowed to stay would have encouraged an anti-vaccine sentiment in essence here. Now, the whole affair has not only had a negative impact on the Australian Open, people are still talking about it on the very first day of this prestigious tournament, but it's also become something of an international affair.
Well, firstly, I can confirm that Mr. Djokovic departed Australia last night. So that was on the basis of the full federal court upholding the decision of Minister Alex Hawke to cancel Mr. Djokovic's visa. I think throughout this process, Australians can be very confident, very sure that the Morrison government will always look after their best interests and Australia's national interests. So I think that in the process, we've got to be very clear about what the role of the federal government is, and that is to make sure that our borders are protected. We have always had a very strong position on that, and this matter was in fact no different.
Those who think they have asserted some principles only showed that they in fact had no principles. You harassed the best tennis player for 10-11 days only to hand him on the 11th day the decision that you knew on the first day you would hand down. And to reiterate, if you said those who are not vaccinated have no right to enter, Novak Djokovic either would not come or would vaccinate. In this way, you left open a possibility for medical exemption, and he came in accordance with this. He did all that was necessary, and then harassment and bullying of so far unseen proportions commenced. In the sense of a media lynch, a virtual witch hunt against a person and a country, because they wanted to use Novak Djokovic to make an example how the world order functions.
And it's worth repeating that Novak Djokovic initially applied for and received a medical exemption to participate in this year's Australian Open as an unvaccinated player. He received that exemption from Tennis Australia, which runs the tournament here, as well as the Victorian government. But earlier today, Australian Prime Minister Scott Morrison said that Djokovic did not receive a visa from the Australian government, which issues visas to arrive in this country, or any kind of medical exemption from the government. Now, normally if you are deported from Australia, that means you cannot return for at least 3 years. However, Morrison did leave the door open for the Serbian tennis player, to potentially come back next year, which would allow him to potentially participate in the Australian Open. That's A, if he wants to, and B, if he meets all the requirements once again. Ben Dunn?
Well, next year or not, Australia now has a tough COVID situation at hand. If I understand it correctly, Greg, you're right out a venue of the Australian Open. Do the tennis players and the audience feel safe during these extraordinary times?
Well, it's an interesting question. We talked to a number of fans here today, and you have to remember that people living in the city of Melbourne, one of the most locked down cities so far during the pandemic in the world, are very much used to restrictions and protocols, and this year's Australian Open is no different. In fact, they've actually increased things a little from last year, and last year's event was the first major international sporting event to be held during the pandemic. This year they've reduced crowd sizes by 50%. Just to get inside, you first have to present your phone register through a QR code. Next, you have to show proof of vaccination, because all fans, staff and players must be vaccinated. And then once fans get inside, they need to wear face masks virtually all of the time. Players and staff are routinely tested throughout their time here, although there is some discrepancy on just how much of an honor system that is, meaning that players are responsible for testing themselves. Any positive tests, people will then be moved to isolation. And all this is because of a surging Omicron variant. You can hear a little bit of noise in the background right now. Tens of thousands of cases reported here in Melbourne and across the state of Victoria a day. In fact, it's believed that surge in cases is having an effect on the Australian Open. To give you an example, today, so far, we're told about 5,000 people are expected to attend day matches. The evening matches, usually the marquee matches, only about 7,000 people are expected. That is way down from virtually any year the Australian Open is hosted, and especially on the very first day. Ben Doug?